morning, good afternoon, good evening. South Africa is gearing up for elections this year, 2024. And I think Zimbabweans should really sit up and pay attention. There are so many things to be learned from what is happening in South Africa, particularly when you consider that the governing ANC party has played such a destructive role in Zimbabwe for, I don't know, the last decade at least, particularly in our own elections last year. There cannot be any doubt that ANC had its own agenda. As we know from ANC's own Congress towards the end of 2022, they vowed that they would never allow regime change in Zimbabwe. Who are they? What right does ANC have to say we are not going to allow regime change in Zimbabwe? Surely, who decides who governs the country should be the people of Zimbabwe, not some other foreign government, even if it is the most powerful regional government in SADC. But that is what the ANC did. And so they came up with the pretense that whatever happens in Zimbabwe must be, if it doesn't result in ZANU-PF staying in power, it must be a result of somebody else, the Western in particular, regime change agenda. Of course, it has been a feeble excuse that ZANU-PF itself has used to justify rigging the elections. All opposition parties in Zimbabwe were accused of being agents of the West with an agenda for regime change. So the democratic will of the people has been denied again and again under the pretense that to allow regime change, to allow ZANU-PF to be defeated would be to allow the West to have regime change. The debate in South Africa is interesting. And at the present moment, it looks like ANC is not going to win these upcoming elections. This particular video, I think the analysis of the gentleman here, Prince Mashele, is really interesting, and I think Zimbabweans should pay attention. And generally, we should be paying attention to what is happening in South Africa because there's so many lessons to be learned. But I'll just play, I'll not play the whole night. Yeah, it's about an hour long. I'll only play snippets from it, particularly towards the end. So bear with me.
The DA and smaller parties, they could constitute a government, especially if the ANC, by the way, was to slip below 40%, which is not impossible. That could happen. I mean, South Africans are very angry. Yes. They cannot wait to go and punish the ANC. Yeah. An ANC president, who is a state president in South Africa, is the weakest in his second term. We have seen what happened to Mbeki. We have seen what happened to Zuma. So once Cyril Ramaphosa is in his second term, you will see what the Paul Mashatile faction will do. They will fight to the death. Why? They know in any case, this guy is serving his last term. So let's fight in order for us to get into power.
Prince Mashele is a man who is loved and loathed by many people in South Africa, especially in some of the political parties. And he's back with us today. Prince, welcome back to the State of the Nation. Lovely to see you again.
Thanks, Mike, for inviting me. I always enjoy this platform.
Yeah, well, everybody out there, I think, is enjoying the platform. So subscribe. That's the end of the lecture. Prince, yeah, we head towards an election. A lot's happening. Things are moving very, very quickly. And, a lot's changed since we last spoke. We've seen the emergence of MK Party down in KZN and some fierce politicking. How do you see the situation at the moment?
Look, nothing much really changed since we last spoke. And we can bracket out the MK. The reason why I say nothing much has changed is because what most South Africans know, they still know, which is the ANC will not get a 50% in this election. So that we have known for some time. The entry of parties like the MK merely serve to bring down the ANC below 50%. So what that party would do, in my view, will hit the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal in the main. Outside KwaZulu-Natal, I don't actually see good prospects for the MK party. But KwaZulu-Natal is very important because that's where the numbers are. Remember, almost half of South Africa's population, just about 46, 45% of South Africa's population is in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. So if you hit the ANC hard in KwaZulu-Natal, you hit the ANC hard in Gauteng, you can actually hold the ANC below 50%. That's essentially what explains why the ANC actually fell below 50% in the previous local government elections in 2021. So the picture...
I'll stop it there. I think most people would agree that South Africans are angry with the ANC. This is what it should be in a healthy democracy. The people should be able to say, we are not happy with the way you're running the country. And the ultimate expression of democratic will is to be able to vote somebody out of office. This is absolutely essential for a healthy and functioning democracy. What we have in Zimbabwe is a situation where ZANU-PF says they have got the divine right to rule that country. We liberated this country, and therefore then we and we alone have got the right to rule. This is at the heart of our problem in Zimbabwe. ZANU-PF does not accept that the ordinary Zimbabwean has the right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. This is what we need to put right. This is why we need the democratic reforms to make sure that we restore that mismatch. No one has the right to rule. That should be at the heart of our political system. No one has a divine right to rule. The mandate to rule must be derived from the people in a free, fair, and credible election. And that is the only mandate that should be legal. To come and say, no, I fought in the liberation war, therefore then I've got a right, is totally meaningless. The right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country is actually, it's more than a right. It's actually the very essence of good governance. And many people have criticized the late Nelson Mandela. I believe that the one thing, the legacy, his biggest legacy to South Africans is that he left them with a a healthy and functioning democratic system. South Africans are able to change, and I believe this year they will probably be able to remove ANC from government, purely because South Africa has inherited at the time of independence democratic institutions that are able to deliver free, fair, and credible elections where the right of the individual is valued and respected. That is absolutely fundamental. In Zimbabwe, we had no such luck. Our first elections, the ones that delivered independence in 1980, ZANU-PF, Robert Mugabe and his cronies, campaigned on the basis telling the electorate that if ZANU-PF does not win the elections, the Bush war would continue. Of course, people voted to end the Bush war. But that is no longer a free and fair and credible election. Some people have argued that, that was only political banter. Well, we know that 3 years later, 1983, ZANU-PF launched the Kukurahundi. There was no political banter there. This was real. The primary purpose of the Kukurahundi was to coerce the late Dr. Joshua Nkomo and his ZAPU colleagues to give up ZAPU and join ZANU-PF. And when they finally did in 1987, Mugabe used that as the platform to impose the de facto one-party state that has remained in power to this day. Zimbabweans have never had free, fair, and credible elections. Never. And it is most disappointing, like I said at the beginning, that the ANC government in South Africa aided and abated ZANU-PF in rigging the elections last year and getting away with it. And I'm glad to see that ANC is not likely to get the majority. This is as should be. The electorate should be able to have the final say. They should be able to say, you have failed to govern and we can remove you. That is the ultimate expression of a free, fair, and credible vote. You can remove the incumbent government. The idea that you cannot remove the incumbent government is nonsense. Utter nonsense. But let's listen to this video a bit further. I'll move it on to something that he said I think is valid towards the end.
And, made an impact in the 6 municipalities that they stood in. The question is, those other parties, do you think they're going to get to parliament? Rise Mzansi, Build One South Africa.
Look, you are correct in the picture that you paint. You can see that the smaller parties, Action SA, Rise, Mzansi, Build One South Africa, they attract the middle-class component of the South African political leadership, especially the younger generation. But the problem with that, the component that is attracted by these parties, is that they are way too rational in the way they conduct themselves. And the South African political landscape responds better to noise than substance. Unfortunately, That's why the EFF is growing faster than this rational. I mean, think of it. There was a party called Agang South Africa led by Mampele Rampel, right? Mampele Rampel, with a record of leading the World Bank, UCT, and so on, she could not attract voters to her cause. Why? Because she was not a noisy politician, very rational, wants order, and so on. So my worry about this new political party is that they are not appealing when it comes, they're not appealing to the kind of voters who vote for the EFF. And remember, the voters who vote for the EFF, that pool is actually bigger than the rational middle class voters. So I don't see this category of new parties, your Action SA, your Rise Mzansi, doing well. Rise Mzansi, if they get one seat in parliament, they'll be very lucky. Build South Africa, One South Africa, if they get one seat in parliament, they'll be very lucky. Action SA now has a bit of a base because they did fairly well in Gauteng. I think that they're going to get something, but I don't see them above 5%.
Yeah, look, I mean, certainly one of the things that would set them apart from, say, the Agang, which I think is a good example, is that these parties have gone out and built structures on the ground. There is no doubt. They've got branches.
I'll stop it right there. I just wanted to comment on that specific item. I think this is probably one of the weaknesses that we have seen in African politics, while democracy has not been very strong even in countries like South Africa, regardless of the democratic institutions, that the electorate respond to noise rather than substance. That is a serious weakness in any nation, particularly a nation that wants to be a democratic nation. The issue of people must be well educated and informed and diligent cannot be overemphasized. And as long as we have a majority of voters who respond to noise than substance, you will always have a mediocre government. So changing government here, for instance, will not result in a quality government. Because if the electorate were responding to noise, you would not have picked the quality leaders. This is a fundamental weakness. And one would have hoped that maybe a government that emerges would seriously look into that. One way of addressing that problem is really allowing freedom of expression. And South Africa, to some extent, has had that advantage. Whereas in Zimbabwe, we've got the Minister of Information, who should really be called the Minister of Propaganda, because the primary purpose of the Minister of Information is to control public media. Zimbabwe's dominant print media and electronic media are controlled by the government. The private media that has emerged, you'll find that licenses have been issued only to those who supported ZANU-PF, and those who don't have been subjected to all manner of harassment. I think in Zimbabwe, what we need is to abolish this nonsense of Minister of Information. We need a truly free and independent media whose primary function should be to inform the public and educate them. Because only an educated and well-informed electorate can hold the government of the day to account. We need to abolish the Minister of Information, the Minister of Propaganda. We have got a long way to educate our electorate. And that would be one way of doing it. While we have 45 years after independence, we still have this Minister of Information, of Minister of Propaganda, beggars belief. This is one of the areas where a healthy and functioning democracy needs to address. And for us, we should have abolished it a long time ago. I'll just quickly play the last bit of this clip.
Can you imagine if you were president, Mike, at that time, and you watch this stuff on TV? These people are running around. What would you have done? Would you have said to the army and the police, come together, go and shoot them down? If the army and the police had done so, killed 5,000 people during that, let me tell you, South Africa would never be the same again. So there was a dilemma. What do? Do you go murder them? Or do you let it run until it comes to an end, so that afterwards you can go rebuild businesses, but at least you haven't murdered people? That was a dilemma. Let me tell you what I would have done. I would never have ordered the police and the army to go and murder people like they did in Marikana. I would have let it run and learn lessons so that afterwards it doesn't happen again. And one of those biggest lessons, by the way, is intelligence. You have to strengthen intelligence. Intelligence was caught napping. If intelligence was powerful enough, strong enough, maybe that could have been avoided.
I'd like to close off with something that's a little bit different, and that is that for as long as many of us can remember, the ANC has had financial problems. Suddenly they don't have financial problems. How do you explain that?
The ANC has never had financial problems when it comes to an election. The ANC has financial problems long before. So in other words, the ANC doesn't care about paying its workers. The ANC cares about going back to office. Why? Because going back to office comes with the opportunity to steal state resources. So once you are back in government, you don't worry whether your employees at Luthuli House go hungry or not. So all the rogue forces have put together money in order to fight these elections so that they can go back to office. And remember, if they go back to office, they will steal more money. That's the logic that drives the ANC. And it's as basic as that.
That cannot be disputed. I think we've seen it happen in Zimbabwe in even more graphic ways. Zimbabwe now, one of these, our biggest problem is looting. And it has been now institutionalized looting. And come elections, ZANU-PF has massed resources. From the gold mafia, we heard that Mnangagwa was getting a cool $240 million towards his election campaign. And it's not only gold that is being looted. There's diamonds, lithium, and many other resources. So you can see a situation here where, because corruption has become so rampant, those in power have become so incredibly powerful. Their access to money is unbelievable. And it just, of course, doesn't require, you don't have to be a genius to realize that ZANU-PF could and has been bribing the opposition, paying, infiltrating the opposition, such that to the point where it really is, there is some truth in saying that Triple C is but ZANU-PF Team B. They are playing as an opposition, but with a view of making sure that Team A wins at all times. ZANU-PF Team A has paid the opposition to play to lose. That is the only rational explanation one can give for such moves by Triple C, for instance, to insist on playing, on participating in flawed elections. It doesn't make any sense at all why Nelson Chamisa insisted in participating in flawed elections, so flawed that we didn't even have a verified voters roll for Pete's sake. Even when it came to the elections themselves, he had the money to deploy his election agencies at all the polling stations, and yet he did not. Why? And here is the man who was saying, right up to the voting day, I have plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, when he knew he had not done so. That could only be done by somebody who is not playing to win. He has been paid to play to lose. MDC's greatest failing to the nation was to fail to implement the democratic reforms during the GNU when they had the golden opportunity to do so. MDC failed to implement even one token reform. Why? Because Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office. The ministerial limos, the generous salaries and allowances, and for Saleh himself, the $4 million mansion in Highlands. This is why some of the ZANU-PF cronies were boasting during the GNU when you asked them, why is MDC not implementing the reforms? They'll look at you and laugh at you and tell you, Mazwana MDC adziza kudyka anyerere. Which is true. MDC leaders had learned to enjoy the benefits of the gravy train. They were not going to rock the boat. They were playing as opposition, but knowing fully well that ZANU-PF has got to win. Team A has got to win. They are just Team B making up the numbers. When push comes to shove, Team A must win. And that is what has been happening here. Zimbabwe will never hold free, fair, and credible elections because ZANU-PF has become incredibly rich because of the looting. They can mobilize all these people who are looting to contribute to bankroll ZANU-PF's rigging machinery. And these people know that by bankrolling ZANU-PF, making sure that ZANU-PF wins, will only open the doors for them to rig, to loot the next 5 years. And whatever they contribute, they will recover it within the first few months of ZANU-PF getting back into power. And the opposition will participate in these flawed elections just for the sake of the few gravy train seats that the regime is offering. Even Chamisa himself could not deny that in November 2022, when Mnangagwa offered $40,000 US housing allowance to all the MPs and senators, that was a bribe. Mnangagwa, that was not budgeted for, and yet was able to pay it. All the MPs, senators got that. Of course, that opened the door. The ministers and deputy ministers got their share. The deputy ministers got $230,000 US housing allowance. And the ministers, $500,000. And as we moved into the elections itself, more and more people were getting all these generous helpings. Chiefs were getting the twin cab trucks, headmen, motorcycles, right up to the judges. In June 2023, just weeks before the election, nomination day was to open, all the judges in Zimbabwe got $400,000 US housing allowance. Of course, it was a bribe. And so the CCC members, they were determined to get onto the gravy train. The idea that they would boycott the elections to force ZANU-PF to at least produce some of the basic documents like a verified voters roll was completely out of the question. So what did they do? They pretended that they've got winning in rigged election strategies. This is where I've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes came in. We have got an opposition now that is not interested in winning power, that is not interested in seeing the democratic voice of the people being heard. They are playing not to win or to make sure that people have got their voices are heard. They are playing for the sake of the few gravy train seats that ZANU-PF is offering them. That cannot be denied. It is shocking that many Zimbabweans, they pretend not to know that. I have often quoted David Coulthard's comment on the very issue. This is a quotation from his own book. And I would like to refer to it again. This was in 2013, when the opposition participated in those elections. And this was David Coulthard now admitting that the process of 2013 election was so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was really to withdraw. But they would not withdraw. because they also knew that ZANU-PF was offering a few gravy train seats to those who participate in those elections. So the opposition now is participating in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy out of greed. And ZANU-PF has got the money to bankroll those activities. This is the dilemma we are in. You're not going to get ZANU-PF to implement any meaningful reforms when they know the opposition will participate in the flawed elections, no matter how flawed the process gets. This is the problem we've got to address in Zimbabwe. We've got to face up to it. I'd like to conclude by once again encouraging Zimbabweans to pay attention to what is happening in South Africa. There are really a lot of important lessons for Zimbabweans to learn from there. South Africa, I believe, the South Africans will be able to punish ANC for the 30 years of failure and corruption that has brought South Africa to what it is today. And hopefully, that lesson will be learned by their politicians, that they cannot loot and mismanage the country's public resources and get away with it. That can only be positive for South Africa, the country, and the people. That is what we need in Zimbabwe too. Thank you very much for listening. And for those of you who are able to join us, please join us at 6 o'clock UK time or 8 o'clock Zimbabwe time. We'll be discussing some of the current affairs in Zimbabwe. And with that, thank you very much and good night.